International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival DocuDays, which is happening for 17th time this year. And I'm very grateful for you to joining us, because it's great that you are happening to be interested in documentary films, and specifically in online edition of this festival. I wanted to say that you are now watching us probably on a DocuDays website or in a Facebook, where we are airing with the Ukrainian version of this talk. And then on YouTube, you can watch us in English. And also you can, of course, check out the Scottish films that we will be talking about today at the DocuSpace. DocuSpace is a platform for all the films that are presented in the program of DocuDays this year. And at DocuSpace, please go check out the films and put your questions at the Q&A boxes. It's a special tool for you to connect with the filmmakers. And my name is Maria. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a director and producer, and I'm welcoming today with me amazing filmmakers and film professionals. And I would like them to, of course, introduce themselves. And I will start probably from Noe. Please here.
Thank you, Maria. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I've been wanting to take part in DocuDays for many years. You've been going nearly as long as Scottish Documentary Institute, so I feel that we are sisters kind of organization. So I'm really pleased to be here today. So my name is Noe Mandel. I'm director of the Scottish Documentary Institute, and as I said, we've been going for nearly 18 years. We set up this organization in order to stimulate the love and the passion for documentary filmmaking in Scotland, but also to help Scottish filmmakers to get back out in the world and stand on the solid ground of being creative documentary filmmakers as they deserve, really. So it's been a very long adventure, but we're getting there. We've got amazing filmmakers now, and I'm delighted that you've programmed some of the shorts that we've been doing. So thank you for doing that. And of course, beyond kind of helping training young filmmakers, we also have all sorts of different activities in order to promote documentary, from production to exhibition to debates, really, because it's so important for us to really think what documentary is about and to keep pushing the boundaries of the stories that we trying to share with the rest of the world. And now more than ever, really, because we've got to use our imagination in order to be able to see the world we are going to be moving into, not just the one that we left behind a month ago, and trying to define those new narratives, trying to find new ways of expressing who we are, what we want, and the stories that we've got to tell is really, really important. Sorry for this long introduction.
No, of course. I think it would be good to follow up with Alexandra, because you work together with Noe, right?
Indeed. Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much for having me invited in the panel as well. So my name is Alexandra Coulter. I'm originally from Romania, hence the name is not Scottish, but Scotland has become my second home since I moved 5-6 years ago to actually pursue a PhD on human rights film festivals. So I know of DocuDays and other human rights film festivals all over the world. And after finishing my degree, I started working as distribution and festivals coordinator at SDI. So I'm basically the first point of contact between festivals and SDI and the filmmakers. And I'm also dealing with festival strategies for the films that we've supported throughout the years, the shorts and feature-length documentaries, as well as handling deliverables and screenings. I'm also working part-time as a festival producer at Document Human Rights Film Festival, which is the longest-running human rights film festival in Scotland, and also a member of the Human Rights Film Network, as well as the same as DocuDays. So I'm really happy to discuss with all of you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we'll go then to Rohan.
Hi there, thank you, Maria. Yeah, my name's Rohan Berry-Kirkmore. I'm the consultant and programmer for the Edinburgh International Film Festival documentary strand. I've been working with the festival since the 2016 edition, and I programmed previously the Polish country focus for Edinburgh International Film Festival. I've also worked with a regional exhibition project in the north of England, which was called Cine North, and that was about taking film out into rural communities. And I also do programming for various other organisations to do with cinema exhibition. Yeah, I've been working with Edinburgh on the documentary side of things for about 5 years, but this is my first year really kind of in the kind of centre of the programming on that front. And the documentary strand obviously is an important part of the festival, which has the Scottish Documentary Institute filtering into it quite heavily. And yeah, we're kind of constantly looking for new interesting voices out there telling unique and interesting stories.
Thank you, and we will go for introduction of Kitty.
Hello, my name's Kitty Anderson. I'm the director of Lux Scotland, which is based in Glasgow. Lux Scotland is a non-profit organisation that supports, promotes and develops artists' moving image here. It's maybe worth saying that although Lux Scotland is only just over 5 years old, we're part of Lux, which is a London-based organisation, which was established in 2002, but has a long lineage of predecessors stretching back to the 1960s. So we're very young, but we've got some very old relatives. And we present a year-round programme of screenings, often in collaboration with venues and festivals. We're actually non-venue based ourselves. We also have a professional development programme of workshops and seminars and advice sessions, and then several special projects that take place across the year, including the Artists Moving Image Festival, which is an annual festival based here in Glasgow, the Margaret Tate Award, which is a £15,000 commission for Scottish-based artists, and Now and Next, which is a relatively new programme of 20 short commissions for broadcast in collaboration with BBC. But maybe the thing just worth flagging up is that this is all artist moving image, so our relationship with documentary is slightly different. We work with a lot of artists on more experimental documentaries, but it's going to be really interesting to hear more about this wider context with my colleagues here in Scotland.
Thank you so much. And then we are going to Shona.
Hi there, my name is Shona Thompson and I'm the founder of A Kind of Seeing. I'm a producer of live events and curator as well. I've been working for over 20 years in film exhibition, running festivals like the Silent Film Festival that happens here in Scotland, the Hippodrome Festival of Silent Cinema. I was the producer of that for its first 5 years. And I've worked at the Edinburgh International Film Festival for many years as well, programmed documentaries there many years ago. And I am a producer now, freelance, under the banner of A Kind of Seeing, working with organisations like the BFI Film Audience Network, Film Hub Scotland, to put together touring programmes that go across Scotland and across UK as well. And I do a lot of work curating those projects as well. So I specialise, I suppose, in archive. So I do a lot of work, just picking up on what Noe was saying there about this time now of defining new narratives and the stories that are there to be told. I do a lot of work with archive that is, yes, the kind of reminiscence and nostalgia benefits that can offer, but also that idea of using the past to look to the future. So what can we learn? What can we see from the pioneers? And what can we then use as sort of forging forward? So I do a lot of work as a filmmaker, maybe repurposing those films. At the moment, for example, I'm working on a project called Launch, about Scotland's lifeboats. So working with the Royal National Lifeboat Institute here in the UK and their archive of films to create a new film, and then working with musicians from across UK to create a whole new live event, which, as you might imagine, is on hold right now, but looking at new ways to to work with that. And that's what's quite interesting to discuss at the moment as well, in terms of the live experience in cinema.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the introductions. I think I would really want to start at all from the question about how your institutions or your activities, because were affected by the crisis with the coronavirus, because you mentioned, Shona, that of course your project is on hold, but did you find any ways of finding an alternative, alternative strategies to do that? I will start from you.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, obviously, and challenging as a live events producer and filmmaker. But I have this massive belief in the big screen, and I know that we all do, you know, in that communal experience. And a lot of what my work in a kind of seeing has been showing the films, but then having that context around it. And that for me has been something I've really been picking up on in the last few weeks, is actually how do we then share that context around the films? Yes, there's lots of watch-alongs and watching films online, and the amazing, you know, accessible films that are out there online as well. But it's those conversations around it. That's what really interests me. And so encouraging groups in the community, and that can be any kind of community, you know, whether that's a community that doesn't normally go to the cinema or anything, to go into the archives and to find footage and material that's really relevant to them, and then they create the event. And I think there's a potential for more of that. I'm still working that out. We're still in early stages, but how can you go into those archives, curate it yourself, and then share that and give it your own context as well? I think that's a potent thing that could happen.
Thank you. Rowan, how was it? Was the festival?
Well, obviously, it poses a number of problems for any festival going on at the moment in the current situation. The main kind of purpose of so many festivals is to bring together professionals from within the industry with audiences to share a very public experience. And when that's no longer possible, then it forces us to look into different kind of scenarios. Edinburgh officially postponed at the beginning of April, end of March. So we're kind of in this like flux period at the moment where we're kind of looking into different strategies and different avenues for bringing about certain elements of the festival. I know that it's very important for the festival to continue to have some presence in 2020 because it's been the longest running continuously running film festival. So that's a kind of vital aspect of it. Speaking from my own experiences of other festivals in the intervening period, so I was used to go to CPH Docs at the end of March, and that was the first one that really got hit directly, I think, out of the major documentary festivals. And so their kind of solution seemed to be in part to make available the industry side of things for industry professionals, and to also come up with an online platform for accessing the content for a public audience. So that's definitely one way forward, perhaps, in this current climate. Another festival very recently that's obviously pursued similar routes, but with a slightly different MO on it, was Visions do Rio, which has gone about making the kind of content of the festival freely available, but to a limited number of people, based on their kind of subscription access. So these are kind of like, I guess, ways that Edinburgh further down the line might also be looking to explore. We're committed, though, I think, by and large, to trying to find the best possible way for it to happen in a physical space at the other end of this corona virus situation. And so really that's what we're aiming to put in place. Our programming work had effectively been done, and we were right at the end of that kind of programming period, and we were looking to finalise the programme in the kind of end of March, beginning of April period. So we would have been at this point putting things in place for concreting that program. And that's obviously something that's now, that work's been done, and we're kind of looking to kind of keep placeholders in there for stuff that we're interested in, but obviously it's not going to be happening at the time that we were originally scheduled for it to be happening. So it leaves a lot of kind of uncertainty, I guess, about what we can have content-wise further down the line. But yeah, at the moment, the status is that we're looking to try and work our way around this at the other side of the coronavirus situation and make things happen in a physical space at the other end of that, hopefully.
Thank you. And then I think it's a good bridge to Alexandra, because from festivals, there always goes to the festival strategy, of course. And especially, I was curious that you mentioned in the introduction that you are part of the Human Rights Film Festivals network. And how is it going in the network? Do people share the knowledge, or it's one part of the question. And then the second one would be, how did it affect the festival strategies that you're working on with filmmakers?
Cool. Yeah, so I'll start with the first part of the question and the Human Rights Film Network. And I would like to acknowledge that it is, I feel like one of the positive things that has come out of this entire crisis situation is that people are coming together, festivals are coming together. So the Human Rights Film Network have been in touch with all the member festivals, basically asking how each of us are coping with this situation, and also how as a network they could support us. So we have this kind of group email. We also have a group WhatsApp. There's also a survey going on in the hopes that it will all kind of help find out what are the problems and how to solve them. And also in Scotland, I believe that I do feel like festivals are coming together also with the help of Film Hub Scotland, this kind of organization that brings together all these kind of exhibitors and organizations, also in the kind of with the aims of trying to offer support when there are so many uncertainties. And yeah, to answer to the second question, or the second part of the question, it was very difficult time with festivals and the festival strategies we've had. So for instance, one of the projects that we are running at SDI is the Bridging the Gap, which is a talent development program that supports emerging filmmakers who are just starting out in their career, and they're probably making their first or second short documentary. And 5 shorts, part of this program, were released last summer at Edinburgh Film Festival, actually. And since then, they've been traveling throughout the world in other festivals, and we were looking forward to some of the big, very prestigious festivals like Hot Docs and San Francisco International Film Festival and a few others, to have those films for them to be shown, to be screened. And I was receiving basically emails almost every day that those festivals where the films were selected were cancelled or postponed, and all these kind of questions about what's going to happen with the film, all these kind of uncertainties of whether it can go online or not, and all this other discussion around kind of licensing rights and premiere status if the festivals are going online, that I feel have really affected the strategy and what we kind of envisaged for these films. So now we're also thinking of looking at options online for online platforms, and whether these could be a normal progression for the films to be shown, or whether we should kind of wait and see if festivals are coming back in the normal way of people coming together. So yeah, this definitely had made us rethink the strategy, and also for looking forward to the next films that we're gonna perhaps integrate more of that kind of online strategy as well.
I think it's also good to follow up with Noah. I know I was also curious, how did it affect SDI? Because I know that you also are doing not just production support, but training. How is it in these days? There is a kind of opinion that it's the best time to develop projects if you cannot shoot them. So what do you think? How did it affect SDI?
Yeah, on the level of production, it really was terrible for us because we've just commissioned 3 new documentaries for the BBC with young talent attached to it, and literally 3 days after commissioning, we had to say sorry. We've got to stop, and of course we don't know for how long. But in documentaries, not just stopping production, is what happens to your characters, what happens to the story that you are going to tell. Because whatever is going to happen, I'm sure, even if we're talking about September or October, it's going to be a very, very different situation and therefore very different story. So on one hand, of course, we want to honor the filmmakers that we've commissioned and the work that we've promised them, because if nothing else, for a lot of them, it's like their little light of hope at the end of the tunnel. But to tell you the truth, I'm really worried about, well, I don't know what story we're going to be getting. So it means that all the work that we've done in development with them probably is going to have to start all over again come September, or come kind of the time, and who knows, maybe even have to keep the filmmakers but find a different story. I mean, we just don't know at this stage. So that's great source of anxiety for everyone. It's for the filmmakers, of course, for us as commissioning editors, but also for the funders who promise the money to put into those films. So we're just going to have to survive that. Same with Bridging the Gap. We've had 6 months development period with 5 films, 5 filmmakers. One of them has filmed about 70% of the film, but the last 30% are quite crucial to closing the story. And I don't think the last 30% that the filmmaker was planning to do is going to exist. So the 70% of the, which has already been shot, probably is going to be wasted. Probably it will mean kind of starting over again. Probably it means us kind of, having to find new funds in order to be able to finance a new production instead of just carry on the same one. The others, same thing. I mean, they're in suspense.
Yeah, I think it's very important that there is an institution and there is some support. At least you're not, as a filmmaker, alone in trouble. And that's why I also wanted to bridge to Kitty, because I know that Lux also supports not just strictly filmmakers, but people who work with moving image. And that means that you need some means of exhibition. So especially with the problem of exhibiting in an actual physical space, how did it affect Lux, Kitty?
So we had to cancel and postpone the sort of immediate events, but actually it was quite a good opportunity to start taking some of them, those that we could, online, and we were able to do that quite quickly, which was nice. So I guess we were able to prioritise the professional development events, which is that sort of training and support part of our programme, and work with the people who were leading those events to work out a way to do it. And then from that, we started trying to do something almost sort of weekly to support the artists in our sector. So we have advice sessions, we have a sort of discussion group every couple of weeks. We're now finding ways to commission works that are specifically for an online platform. And then we're also trying to socialize online as well. So it's actually been a really exciting opportunity for us, if that doesn't sound too crass. It's enabled us to do things that we've actually wanted to try and do for a long time, but have lacked the opportunity, or always felt like, if we're going to do that, we need to do it perfectly. Whereas this time it's just like, we're just going to do it and then see what comes from it. And I think, we try and work across the whole of Scotland, but obviously it's difficult with limited budgets and capacities and things. And suddenly we can reach not only the audience across the whole of Scotland, but the whole of the UK and beyond. And that's been really exciting for us. The other, I think, major part in terms of supporting artists and access to our work is accessibility. And of course, when things are online, the options for captioning are so much more simple. I mean, you know, literally to be able to press a button and the event is captioned, it's incredible. So that's really opening up a lot of the work that we're doing as well. And I'm trying to think who mentioned the festivals coming together now, but
I think it was Alexandra.
Alexandra, yeah. There's been some really nice conversations about festivals collaborating, and as part of that, accessibility seems to be at the forefront, which is really nice. That that's not just a sort of individual, you know, opportunity for our organisation, but actually for the whole of Scotland and beyond. So, and then I guess in terms of, like, you know, how what will happen, how things are going to fall after all this. I guess we've also been trying to find ways to program things that, and this is, I guess, always the problem when we don't know when lockdown will end. So we might well be.
Oh, I think we got frozen.
Trying to bridge that by thinking, oh, sorry,
again.
Sorry. Yeah, trying to program events that will make sense in a real world as well as in a digital world. So actually trying to think of things that are not like a substitute for real life, but actually a sort of addition, or like a sort of a real positive addition to what we're doing anyway. And therefore, I guess we're hoping that we find some sort of steady, oh, have I gone again? Sorry. Some sort of steady and sustainable way of programming into the future, so that this isn't kind of just a sort of knee-jerk, like, oh, let's do something quick. It's like, actually, this is a great opportunity, and how can we make this work in the long term? And maybe one last thing to say is that there's obviously so many people screening films whose job really is to do that I think they're sitting back a little bit on the screening of works and actually trying to focus more on the conversation and the sort of support for the sector and the individuals. And so on that level, we're trying to find opportunities to support the artists individually. So inviting them to participate in the things that we're doing, so that we can fund them.
Thank you. I think a couple of you mentioned the word conversation, and it's very interesting for me to dive into these two aspects of Scottish filmmaking industry, and one of them is what makes a film Scottish, because I myself live in the Netherlands, and I also saw how the Netherlands deal with it. They do have a cultural points, or they define certain things as being Dutch, and in Ukraine we also have kind of developing way of labeling something Ukrainian. So I was just curious if it depends on I don't know where the filmmaker is coming from, or if it's a Scottish topic. Are there any cultural points? How from the labeling perspective, how does the film is named Scottish? If any of you has any insight on that.
I don't think that there is such a thing as a Scottish kind of film. Sorry. I mean, at Scottish Documentary Institute, we about on average kind of 7-8 people working there. Sometimes we don't have not even a single Scottish person born Scottish kind of working with us. We're very much an international cohort of people who consider Scotland as their home and love Scottish cinema. But there isn't a Scottish cinema. What there is, I think, are Scottish-based filmmakers who offer a new way of looking at the world and looking at themselves. And for me, it's kind of the cohesion and the diversity of having all those people living and working in Scotland, which starts creating this new identity, which goes under the label of the Scottish banner. So our diversity, our curiosity towards the world and ourselves is what I want to define as Scottish. Shona, you are Scottish.
Yes, I am. I even got, you see, I just realized I got my Brigadoon poster in the background as well. I think I have that there just to remind myself of actually what is a Scottish film in some respects, and that I agree with Noe. I don't think there's a specific Scottish film. But a lot of the films I maybe come across in the archive, I'm sure we all do, are films that are made by people not from Scotland, but are trying to give some kind of image of Scotland. And then so when you watch them now, you learn a lot about, I suppose, what folk thought years ago. And these can be sort of like sort of films that were commissioned in London, you know, with various sort of outfits like the GPO film unit and the like, and also maybe sponsored films as well, propaganda films. And you get a lot of these. It's an amazing collection of the National Library of Scotland Moving Image Archive, which is our national film archive. And it's just fascinating to watch that now, and then almost in comparison to films like that were being made at the same time, but like from Margaret Tate, I'm sure Kitty will say a lot more about, but and I know is in the programming strand, where there's she's Scottish, but she has such an international perspective on the world, and you see that in her filmmaking. She was influenced by so many sort of people who were maybe in a non-digital world seemed very far away, but she was well connected and saw those connections. And it's to me, that's an interesting idea of how we see ourselves. That Burns quote, to see ourselves as others see us. Yeah. And as film gets more democratic, people are able to make films who, you know, in the days of film, not everybody had access to film, had access to 35mm, 16mm, 8mm. Whereas now it's people of, you know, you've got a phone, you can do it. And I know that we're talking more about on the kind of more professional filmmaking, but you can get these different perspectives on Scotland now, from films like We Are Northern Lights, which was a film made up entirely of crowd-funded film, basically. So there was a call went out and folks sent in their little clips from their phones, and this montage kind of compilation film came out, which was incredible, did very well at the cinema as well. It's one thing that Scottish audiences love watching Scottish films, or films that are related to Scotland, that are made by Scottish people, feature something Scottish in it, like Brigadoon. No, it's not like really Scottish, but Scottish audiences do love Scottish films, and that challenge is to get those films out there more as well. So then there does become a Scottish cinema, like an industry of Scottish audiences watching films, Scottish filmmakers or filmmakers based in Scotland watching those films, and then having that urge to make films of their own and reflect the community they live in, because it's not necessarily seen in the archive that you see like the huge amounts of, for example, the Chinese community that's been in Scotland for a long time, but there's not a lot of archive footage of that, and so those different communities that just don't get represented sometimes in archives, to actually see that coming through from the footage and the films that come from like the Scottish Documentary Institute, through Lux Scotland, and the festivals that they finally get shown in terms of like Edinburgh and the like. So
I think I would immediately jump to Rohan, because you work with Scottish audiences, and I was curious, what are they receptive for? What interests them? What is the response to certain topics? I just would give a bit of example, because I think in Ukraine there was a massive shake, in a sense, from the audience perspective, where there was released earlier the film called Hit Singers, about the more kind of working class people that wasn't on screens for a long time, and people started recognizing themselves, and as you said, Shauna, reflecting the community, where there is such uprising cases during the Edinburgh Film Festival. And yeah, what I was curious, what do you say about the interest of audience?
So basically with Edinburgh, you definitely see that there are some films that are nominally Scottish, as in there's a Scottish filmmaker somewhere in there, or they're shot in Scotland, or the production's majority Scottish, and they do have, I would say, quite a warm thing comes out of the kind of local audience at the festival. The problem, I guess, that you have with any international film festival on that front, is not a problem at all. It's actually something that's very good, is that you've got a diverse audience by and large that's coming to these events. And so when we're talking about what appeals to an Edinburgh International Film Festival audience, that's a very difficult thing, I think, to fully pin down, because you don't have, I think, that kind of immediate local kind of emphasis that you might perhaps have at other festivals. But then I think if you have a look at, say, for example, one of the films that you've got in your program here, Skiing Birds, the way that kind of played out to local audiences, and the way that was received at Edinburgh, and the way in which that kind of film was embraced was very much like, this is showing something real and something true and current about Scotland. And then for me, the best thing about this, and this is something that I think Noe and everybody at SDI are doing really well, is that this is a film that comes from Swedish filmmakers looking at a part of Glasgow that other filmmakers within the UK perhaps haven't focused on quite so much. And so that for me is kind of, I think, the interest and element that we have here at the moment in Scotland, is you have these kind of people that are interested in telling stories about Scotland that aren't necessarily immediately directly linked to Scotland, and the mirror that they hold up presents something, I think, that's really interesting for the audiences to kind of get their teeth into. And when we're kind of looking at that going out into a wider world as well, and beyond, there's been, I think, increasing success for films that have been Scottish-backed productions in recent years going out into the kind of festival circuit. And that's not to do with necessarily there being something distinctively Scottish at play here, or some kind of old, hokey, kind of tart and kale yard kind of stuff going on. It's very much about these films being interesting stories about the world around us, and coming out of a kind of creative environment that I think's been fostered really effectively amongst small creative communities within this country. So yeah, that would be, I think, one of the kind of things that I would take out there. And yeah, I was thinking there about an example of the kind of work again that gets done in Scotland that's kind of flagging up that kind of diversity. So there was a little short film a few years back by Karina Hawishin. I think it was Alliolating was the name of it. And this is like a film that's about a person in Scotland coming from a mixed background, an Algerian father, a Scottish mother, and trying to kind of place themselves within that context. And I think that, to me, is kind of one of those elements of storytelling that is being done really well within this kind of contemporary landscape in Scotland at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's also good to jump to, Kitty, what you mentioned about the conversation, because I think the audience needs to be also, I don't know, grown up in a sense. They need to learn and go along with the things that are going around, because I think that institutions like Lux and SDI and many more have to, and festivals, of course, have to grow their audiences. How do you do that in Lux, and how do you work with Scottish audiences?
Well, maybe the first thing I wanted to just acknowledge, Noe.
I think we, again.
I mean, Scotland being a very international, sorry. Noe's point about this being a very international sector. So a very international group of people making work, looking at work, being part of the sector generally. And maybe the thing that characterizes it is that it's incredibly supportive, and we're a small country. So, you know, we do have a good network. We talk to each other. We want to help each other. It feels much less competitive. Well, that sounds like it could be a downside, but it feels like we're primarily there to support one another, and that, you know, by supporting each other, we'll support Scotland and the work being made here, and indeed the audiences. I think audience development is a big part of our role here, is introducing artists' moving image to within this wider context. So within cinema programs, we work regularly with the Glasgow Film Theatre and Eden Court in Inverness, and we've been working with Belmont in Aberdeen, and kind of inserting artist moving image within a more mainstream programme. And then indeed within all of the festivals. So we've got an amazing festival network in Scotland, and we work with many of them, particularly the Glasgow-based festivals, to insert artist moving image within those. So yeah, and each of the festivals has a very broad audience, so it's an opportunity to grow the audience for artist moving image too.
I think it's very important that the communities, as you mentioned, are now reached via the online means. And did you discover something new in the responses? Because it's something that I think is very conflicting in all this digital communication, that you sometimes don't hear feedback. because in a festival, in a real life, you have, I don't know, a clapping audience, or at least some movement during the discussion. And I also received a couple of questions here, but that I will be addressing further from our audience online. But how do you work with the audiences that are so far, and how do you get the feedback from them?
Who's that to?
I think to you.
Oh, to me.
Because you mentioned that you could leverage it to reach more of the different Scottish audiences.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is maybe too particular to our environment, but because we partner with lots of different organisations, actually most of our feedback ends up going to the venues or the festivals, not to us. So actually, because we've taken greater control over the events that we're organising, we're able to get the feedback directly to us, and that's been really amazing. So our sort of curve of learning in the last few weeks has just been exponential. So it feels like our direct involvement is shifting. And then I guess there's also these things about the fact that people can chat and comment on things as you speak. It allows for a different kind of interaction and awareness of how people are finding things, whether they can hear you, or what that film you mentioned, what was the full title of it, and it gives you just a different way of engaging with those audiences. So yeah, I think it's very exciting.
I think I would also ask Rohan to say again the title of that film. I'm not sure if that you just mentioned about the person of the different backgrounds.
Yeah, so it's called Ululating. Ululating.
Okay, yeah. I hope that our audiences could write it down and search it further, because I would like to come back to the question of still the Scottish voice or the topics that are rising there, because in our presentation of this talk we mentioned that some of them are really recognizable internationally. So we could feel connected to them in Ukraine or somewhere else in the world. And what do you think is a burning topic right now? Because I would probably pass it now to Noe, because you are developing films with filmmakers. And I was just curious if there is any sort of trend in the storytelling, in the topics that are covered in Scotland now.
I wouldn't say that there is a trend in Scotland, but interestingly enough, a lot of our new talents seem to be very interested in old people. We keep having complaints from our funders saying, can we have about younger people? But we can't force it if our young filmmakers seem to be interested in older people. I actually find it very fascinating, because their way of looking at old age is there's a certain complicity because of their youth. If it was me making the same film, it would be very different. So I think it's kind of interesting kind of trend. I don't know if it's a trend, but definitely there seem to be quite a few filmmakers wanting to work around loneliness, and especially kind of male inability to share emotions and to communicate. I think that's there's a lot of kind of exploration there. There is a lot about diversity, looking at being kind of exploring different genders and different forms of sexuality. Seems to be of great interest right now in Scotland. So yeah, I think those three kind of topics seem to be very popular.
Well, I think it's kind of reflected in our selection at DOCU Days, because I would say that Review is the film about the young boy, and of course the where we are now also is touching about this, like a personal story of the young lady, and of course even if it's not shot by Scottish filmmakers, but Skin Birds is on Scottish youth, so maybe it's good to have some difference of voices and views on it. And I was also curious to pass it to Alexandra, because you're working, of course, with how Scottish films are received internationally, and where there are certain topics that were more I don't know, received as more local at some point, that you would not say that they would go broadly? And were you ever surprised that they actually succeeded internationally?
That's a very good question, because we have, as I've said, through the Bridging the Gap program, we have at a certain point 5 finished short documentaries, and they all deal with kind of different topics and perspectives and parts of the world. So it's always kind of, it's difficult to predict which one will actually go work well in what territories and things like that. And I have found that kind of stories that seem very personal and intimate and local are actually doing very well everywhere in the world. So one example would be That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which focuses a lot on kind of a family related story of the filmmaker, and also in terms of dealing with disability and mental health and the effect it has on the family. So that seems a kind of a very local and personal story, but actually it feels like a lot of people can relate to it from wherever they are in the world. I feel like with very kind of politically engaged stories, those might encounter some sort of obstacles in distribution, because they might be very much connected to a certain topic, and they need further kind of contextualization and discussion on specific stories and what they cover. But it is always a kind of a surprise for us as well when we're distributing films. But definitely, I think these are a way of showing Scotland and what emerges from Scotland filmmakers as enhancing, really talking about diversity and showcasing these marginalized voices. Yeah.
Shauna, also I know that you work with archival materials, as you mentioned, and do you think it's a trend now in a Scottish filmmaking community to come back to the archives, to get access to them? How is the access organized? Because I think that in Ukraine now we have a new wave of the archive-based films, like A Fall of Lenin and other films, and I was just curious, how is the access organized for the Scottish filmmakers with the archives?
Yeah, it's there to protect the owners of the films. That's always an important part, to respect the owners, and I'm sure filmmakers will. So with the National Library of Scotland Moving Image Archive, for starters, they have a collecting strategy. So what is actually available? What films do they collect? They can't collect everything. And so there's a certain, there's thousands of films there that people can select from. And then obviously a lot of that came in on film or on tape. And of course, we know a bit more about film because we've had it for 100 years, but tape, is at the most risk, a very high risk at the moment. And so that digitization process is just continually ongoing as far as I'm aware. Obviously, I don't work for the archives, I don't speak for them, but I do work a lot as a user with them. And so to access the footage, it's a process, and you have to fill in the forms and make sure everyone's happy with it. You have to get either their permission or the permission of the third-party copyright holder. And that's really important. Like I know for Margaret Tate's films, they have to be screened in full with her soundtrack as well. There's no editing and mixing of that, and I completely understand that, and they're so wonderful. I know you would, but otherwise, the kind of repurposing idea. I was actually chatting about this the other day with a musician friend of mine, that when you take the soundtrack off, sometimes it becomes a completely different film. You might have like a 1960s documentary about walking in the Cairngorms, and there's these women walking, and it's hardly, you don't see women that much on the screen sometimes, and certainly not in this film. And there's a man doing the narration. It's always usually a man who does the narration in these days, and it's total mansplaining going on. It's real sort of even women go up in the hills. Imagine that. But then if you take off that narration, then you've got these images of women in the hills just having a good time, and that was just what was shot, and that's what actually happened. And so there's definitely something there, and so I'm not necessarily one of these people, unless the filmmaker obviously asks for it, or the family ask for it, then I'm quite interested in how you can repurpose it, and that is possible in Scotland. As I say, there's process to go through, there's license fees to pay, and I think that's something that we haven't really touched on. It's maybe not for this forum. Is the money element to it? Is the sort of the how do you continue to make money in this situation, and monetizing, which is a horrific word, but we're using it a lot more at the moment. What's going on as a curator, as a filmmaker, as a venue, which is something that is definitely going to happen with the social distancing. So not to turn that onto that subject necessarily, but it's finding that access is definitely possible in the archives. And then just to say as well, there's also the non-formal archives as well that are, I could have said that about the Chinese community. There could be an archive somewhere, somebody has it, or has films that they were taking, and they don't want to share it, that's fine, or they aren't able to, or they just don't know where to go, and there's all that world too, and that's an exciting potential, but whether we would access it and how we find it all and store it all, you'll know that, I'm sure, from
I think at this point we have 5 minutes left, and I would like to address the question from the audience that I think you partially covered before, but it's good to circle back to it in the end. Someone asks, what will be the new normal after the COVID-19? Everything will roll back as before, or online will be the new default for film festivals, programs, and film? Which I think you mentioned a bit about its hybrid, that it will not be a substitute. I think Kitty, you said that it would be something both. But what do you think about this definition of new normal? What do you think will happen afterwards? And especially, I will add it from myself, will it affect the Scottish stories? Because Noe mentioned a bit about, stories will be different, but do you think will it affect somehow your programming decisions as well? So I will pass it to Kitty now.
I think in terms of cinema and festival screenings, we'll very much be taking the lead from those venues themselves. But so far, there's definitely been conversations about, things partially being online to allow fewer people to be in the cinema, or to indeed have like screening spaces where it's half occupied. I think, we won't be making those decisions. We'll be taking the lead from other people. But when it comes to our program, I think it will have shifted fundamentally about how we operate, who we see as our audience. And when you mentioned what kind of feedback we get, I think that's feels like it's changing week to week at the moment, and that's all, we're taking it all on board. And what comes out the other end of this will be, I hope, just an improved version of what we have been doing. So it will be different. It won't be normal. It'll be better. What about that?
What do you think, Rohan?
I was actually thinking about, in relation to something that Kate said a little while back, it's just that idea of this effectively accelerating some of those things that we maybe haven't been given as much attention to as we would like. And so some of these decisions that we've been deferring about how to use online access and how to use online platforms more, I think this is now something that's it's become, as you said, the new normal for the time being, and it's I think opening up opportunities for people to see the potential for that as something that is an add-on to the festival and adds value to the festival, rather than something that's a kind of a behind the scenes kind of adjunct to it for those people in the know. So I think this is I suppose like a moment where you're kind of learning very quickly what can and can't work. And in the case of Edinburgh, I'm sure it's coming from looking at what other kind of festivals are doing in relation to this, and seeing what's potentially best practice going forward.
Alexandra, what will be for your distribution strategies the new normal? What do you think?
I do think that it will be very important to consider, as I've heard before, to consider the online platforms and what they can do for filmmakers and how they can support and help them reach out to broader audiences. And I do expect a lot of films kind of coming out of this and dealing with isolation and lockdown and topics like that. So it will be interesting to see what comes out creatively out of this as well. And also, yeah, I do expect I hope that this collaborative type of work will continue in the future as well.
Great. And Noah?
Oh, I'm very excited. I can't wait to be in the future and see what the present is kind of going to bring us. I mean, not only because of the multiple conversations that we're developing and having, not just across kind of Scotland, but also kind of across the world in terms of exhibition, but even in terms of production. I know right now we've been stopped in our tracks, but documentary filmmakers love challenges, and this is it. This is kind of the biggest challenge we probably all had in a long time, and therefore I think that's what's going to come out of it. It's going to be amazing. I trust my colleagues in filmmaking to be able to use their imaginary, their internal world to make up for all the restrictions that we've got on our external world. My only concern is to try to make sure that we don't carry any discrimination with us in the future. So I want to make sure that women will have their place in this future kind of film scene. I want to make sure that vulnerable filmmakers will be protected by all of us. So if we manage to succeed to hold all those different concerts together and move forward together, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Anna?
Well, that's I think on the operational side of things, which is kind of my work is so reliant in many respects in the partnerships I have with venues and with archives and the physical sort of tangible content as much as and performers as well. So I work part-time a little bit with an organisation called Regional Screen Scotland, which is a sort of cinema development organisation. So we're very much working with like Creative and Screen Scotland and Film Hub Scotland about how operationally we're going to get films and cinemas back, and as a sector we're going to get it back up and running. And I think interesting what Roanne and Kitty say, that idea of the dual nature, the kind of parallel models that are maybe going to come in, that idea of both the live, but that's going to be very difficult, that moment when the restrictions are lifted and we do have lower capacity due to social distancing, and then getting encouraging audiences back into cinemas when it's safe to do so, and now at this moment now, and how we so that merging of the kind of the really interesting digital options that are coming up in terms of exhibition, things like virtual cinema and the video on demand platforms, the digital platforms that the film festivals are using, is exciting. But it's how that can operate on the models alongside the bricks and mortar needs that there will be in the cinema that we just all totally love. And we're going to see those films in the way we're going to get them back in the cinema.
I think you said just very important thing now, that we need to kind of keep the audiences, and we keep thinking, how do we go with this operationally in all levels. So I think it's a great moment to wrap up in this moment, because we already spoke for 1 hour, but I think we definitely encouraged now with this talk our audiences to keep on watching and to specifically check out the selection of the Scottish cinema that's present at the DocuSpace platform. And before I will say thank you to all of you for all these brilliant insights and this great discussion, I would remind to everyone who is watching us that all the films are accessible for free but you, of course, can help the festival and press the donate stripe that you see, the pink stripe on top, and support the festival. And also you can leave your questions to the filmmakers or watch the filmmakers presentations. You can do it for all the films of the competition sections, and for the Scottish films you can do it for films Scheme Birds, for Where Are We Now, the review, and Alexandra's film, and The Third Dad. Unfortunately, of course, it's impossible to do with the Margaret Tate films, but we also encourage you to watch this great selection and get yourself familiar with Scottish cinema and a Scottish voice, as we were talking about it today. And of course, we encourage you to stay with us because after this talk, there will be an event with the Right Now program. And then also there will be tete-a-tetes with the filmmakers. Today it will be with the makers of the Honeyland film. And there will be also, of course, the party tonight. So please join Streams of Docu Days. And at this moment, I would say thank you very much. I hope you all guys will stay safe and healthy. And it was really, really great to talk to you. I would really do a virtual round of applause to each other. That would be great. It was great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shona. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Noe. Thank you, Alexandra. And thank you, Kitty. Thank you, everyone who was watching us, and hope to see you around. Stay in touch with Docu Days.